Hi, my name's Gabriella Raskin, and today I'll be talking about the topic of surveillance. When we discuss national security, particularly in the United States, one topic that's continuously discussed is surveillance. Throughout the history of law, there have been many cases that have involved the issue of surveillance, some of which we discussed in this class. The topic of surveillance was one that we discussed in week 3 of this course. In particular, we looked at 3 separate cases that examined whether amendment rights were being violated. Specifically, one of the cases was that of the American Civil Liberties Union, or the ACLU, versus the National Security Agency, or NSA. This particular case examined whether or not the NSA was violating First Amendment rights of U.S. citizens. Moreover, this case was about warrantless wiretaps. No matter the instance, this case reiterates the fact that when dealing with surveillance, it needs to be warranted and approved by a judicial system and not solely by the executive branch of government. While that particular case was one that many knew about, there have been many more cases involving the NSA and their surveillance of citizens. Highly publicized in 2013 was the case of Edward Snowden, who at the time was an employee for the Central Intelligence Agency. Snowden leaked information regarding a program called PRISM. According to the ACLU, PRISM had the ability to search through American calls, chats, and emails using major internet platforms such as Facebook, Skype, and more. After this information was leaked, the ACLU filed a separate lawsuit against the NSA. According to the stipulation from this case, the NSA was in violation of the Freedom of Information Act. Both of these cases bring to light the fact that wiretapping and other forms of surveillance may be used in monitoring behavior. There needs to be just cause for such monitoring as well as approval. Thus, these cases show that surveillance has enhanced the government's ability to pursue national security objectives. Through programs discussed in these cases, government organizations have been able to use evidence found to their benefit. At the same time, it can be said that cases stemming from surveillance have actually limited the government's ability to pursue particular objectives, as surveillance programs have become more publicly scrutinized. Along the same lines, because of legal action involving these programs, it's also made it more difficult for the government to carry out particular surveillance procedures because they're actually looked at more by the public now. While I believe that surveillance plays a key role in helping to protect freedoms and rights of American citizens, I think that many cases show, especially the ones discussed in this presentation, that surveillance done by our government is a violation of our freedoms as American citizens. And balancing this divide between the government protecting its citizens and maintaining individual liberties, I think there needs to be a more clear line of what the government legally has the right to do, and it needs to be made publicly aware what the government is doing so that citizens are aware of what's being done to them. Unfortunately, the rulings of many of these cases still give a great deal of power to the government, and in particular to the executive branch and subsequently organizations like the FBI, CIA, and NSA. Cases dealing with issues involving the NSA and other organizations using surveillance to their benefit highlight that warrants need to be issued by courts and that approvals need to be made by Congress and not just the president or other executive members. But there needs to also be consequences for those not following these procedures. Simultaneously, procedures dealing with approving these practices, again, need to be more heavily enforced. Lastly, in terms of individual rights and freedoms, it is obvious that without surveillance, those specifically on domestic soil might make it difficult to monitor specific criminal activity. With that in mind, I think that surveillance can be used to protect citizens, but as said before, without having a system in place to warrant the surveillance, there's more harm being done to these rights and freedoms. Although it's a hard topic, there has to be a balance between protecting the nation from harm while still maintaining individual freedoms, such as those laid out in the First Amendment, and particularly freedom of speech. In my opinion, surveillance limits the freedoms of citizens. Since the discovery of PRISM, I think that many people today feel as though the government's always watching them. Whenever I'm sitting in a cafe or in class, I can spot at least half of the laptops have their webcams covered with a piece of paper. This is because people feel that at any moment they may be being watched. Therefore, our freedoms are being limited as people feel as though they might not have the freedom to say or do what they want in the privacy of their own homes or wherever they might be. Or overall, I think that the issue is clear. There is a problem with the balance of surveillance. What's appropriate? Who has the right to monitor it? And how much information should citizens be given? What is clear is that citizens do have the right to protection and freedom, but there needs to be a system that allows for proper monitoring of potential criminal activity. This is where the judicial system comes in. There needs to be proper warrants, as well as a clear system that lays out exactly what is allowed prior to special arrangements. By doing this, I believe that the government can have a secure nation while still making the citizens feel like they have their freedoms.